Hey, everybody. We're going to pick back up. How's your morning going so far? Good? Oh, thank you. Um, so, we are going to start a panel that has some incredible women that will be so inspiring to you. We're going to discuss some different aspects of emotional intelligence and how they have applied it in their own life and leadership, and maybe some of the challenges that they saw along the way that inspired them to create new belief systems in their workplace, or even start their own company if they couldn't inspire the change. I'm going to go over a little bit of each one of their bios, but you can read more about them in your books that you have. We're going to start with Carol Eggert. Yes, everyone calls me Grover, so I always want to clarify if it's Groover or Grover. Eggert. Carol was a Brigadier General, Senior Vice President, Military and Veteran Affairs of Comcast NBC Universal. She leads an 8-person team and provides strategic leadership to all aspects of Comcast NBC Universal's program and outreach to the military and veteran community. Carol completed her distinguished military career in 2014 as an Assistant Adjutant General for the Pennsylvania National Guard and Deputy Commandant for the Army War College. She served in a variety of command and staff positions and completed numerous overseas deployments, including a 15-month combat tour in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom as a chief of the Women's Initiatives Division and senior liaison to the U.S. Embassy, Baghdad, and received numerous military awards and commendations, including the Legion of Merit, Bronze Star, and Purple Heart. Carol holds a master's degree in instructional design and strategic international studies, and recently earned her doctoral degree in organizational leadership. Everyone, please welcome Carol.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, everybody.
So
And let me just say, the War College is all about maintaining peace.
Thank you. Which is emotionally intelligent. So before we move on to Tara, could you just give everybody maybe your definition of what emotional intelligence means to you through your life experience and where you came from into what you're applying into organizational leadership today?
You mean me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So I thought about this a little bit, knowing that that would be one of the questions. And so I went back and looked at history. And emotional intelligence goes way back to Socrates, when Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living. And then it went on to the Greek philosopher, you must know thyself. And then let's move forward to Wicked. My favorite song in Wicked is the Osgood Ballroom. And what's the famous line there? Let's dance through life. There's no reason to lead an examined life. Let's drop all the stress and move forward, not even looking at how our life is. So when I heard that song, I thought, that is not the way to live. We always have to be self-reflective. We can't move through life, I call it on autopilot. I see that in parenting. Many of us repeat the examples our parents taught us, or we see our peers. So I call that parenting consciously. So examine your life, parent consciously, lead consciously.
Love it. Thank you so much. It's interesting that you brought it back to Greek mythology and some of the other various types of leadership. And I just was speaking to somebody here and said, if you really want to learn about emotional intelligence, look back to things like Buddhism too, because it's teaching you, it's the art of empathy, compassion, understanding. So the types of leadership styles that have led in peaceful ways and examined ways is more than just opening the Emotional Intelligence 2.0 book, but to really go back through history, you can see the threads of this conscious leadership that existed. Our next panelist today is Tara J. Frank, She is a sought-after consultant, speaker, and coach who helps individuals and groups define a vision and develop strategies to advance their culture and leadership goals. In 2015, she published her first book titled Say Yes, A Woman's Guide to Advancing Her Professional Purpose, which is a practical tool to helping emerging leaders reach their own professional high grounds. Tara is also president and CEO of the newly formed P3T Group, Inc., a talent engagement company that helps turn employees' purpose and potential into greater business performance. Before becoming an entrepreneur, Tara spent 21 years at Hallmark Cards, Inc., where she became the company's first Black female vice president, and at the time of her promotion to executive management, was the youngest person to rise into senior leadership in Hallmark's history. Yay! While her leadership contributions spanned creative innovation and multicultural strategy and corporate culture, her passion for talent development has been a powerful constant in a sea of powerfully diverse experiences. Her bachelor's degree is in English from Spelman College in Atlanta and is a member of the Executive Leadership Council, the preeminent member organization for the development of global Black leaders. Thank you so much for joining us today, Tara.
Thank you for having me.
So, Tara, you've had an interesting jump recently from corporate world to entrepreneurial world. I'm going to imagine that your definition of emotional intelligence takes some of what you experienced and maybe wanted to change and maybe had some friction changing into now coming on the consultant side where you can infuse your insight a little bit more differently and maybe even more effectively.
Yeah, I will say, for the record, Hallmark is probably one of the most emotionally intelligent corporate cultures I've ever had the pleasure of interacting with. So the jump to entrepreneurship was really, less about wanting to change something or running from something, and more about running to something. Strong passion for leadership development, and as you eloquently kind of shared this morning, emotional intelligence is a critical factor in our overall success profile. I believe that. I know we'll get into that in more detail in the panel discussion this morning. But I also wanted to, the reason we formed the new organization is because while I've been focusing on individual leaders for many years, I recognize that developing an individual leader only gets you so far unless you're really dealing with the culture that they have to go back into. And so now my work is focused on organizational culture because I'm really passionate about helping to ensure that the soil is fertile and that those seeds, right, those individual leaders can thrive in the environments that they work in. So that's kind of how all of that ties together. And EQ, which is multifaceted, obviously, is an important part of that work.
Yes, definitely is multifaceted. I believe that, interestingly enough, both of you are working with organizational leadership and culture. I believe the next wave of innovation that women have a huge advancement in versus the other perceived innovations around science and technology is cultural innovation. And here we are representing it right now, where corporations really are looking to figure out how to maybe break some of the old belief systems and patterns to create more communication, better, effective communication skills that will lead to greater innovation. But I do believe this is the forefront of the next wave of innovation that women do have an enormous advantage of being involved in. Our next panelist for today is Dr. Felice Tillin, who is the president of GroupWorks Consulting and is the director of graduate organization development and leadership programs here at St. Joe's University. She is a consultant, a facilitator, and executive coach with a Fortune 500 and nonprofit organizations. She works in North America, Europe, Asia, and Africa. Dr. Tillin's approach combines her research background with 25 years experience working as a coach, consultant, and educator. At the heart of her work is the fundamental belief that an organization's most important asset is the collective hope, passion, and brain power of its workforce. Felice has been instrumental in the design and facilitation of multiple experiential leadership transformation programs that are grounded in emotional intelligence. She co-created the Coach Capacity Building, an accredited coach training program. Earlier in her career, she held positions as a managing director and senior consultant at Telos Leadership Institute, director of leadership development at the University of Pennsylvania, and director of training and organizational development at Cigna Corporation. In addition to her graduate teaching at St. Joe's University, Felice has taught graduate level courses at the University of Pennsylvania, Wharton School, Temple University, and Thomas Jefferson University. So you can obviously see she has been on the forefront of what is now one of the most relevant trends way before. So thank you so much for paving the way to making this conversation so relevant today. So all of this experience that you've had, and you've definitely been on the forefront of paving the conversation to be as on trend as it is at this moment, you definitely had some friction to rub against, I'm sure, in people understanding the importance. So what would you say is your definition and the value of why you feel so passionate to have sustained a career to bring us to a place that we're all talking about it?
Well, thank you so much, and I'm very honored to be here with all these really accomplished women. So it's inspiring just in itself. So when I started out, I didn't know who was accomplished. It didn't feel like there were so many people to follow. So you kind of had to pioneer some things, and I think some of you probably experienced that as well. I was thinking about it. It's actually, for me, this is kind of almost like I came at this through the back end. When I was listening to what you were saying, it was like, for me, the beginning of my journey was really looking at big questions like, why am I alive? What's my purpose? Where am I going? And these were like questions that I was kind of asking as an adolescent and as a young adult, that brought me to practices of meditation, being involved in groups that were more focused on altruistic, not entrepreneurial, but altruistic goals and missions, and looking inward to yourself to see what is inside of me, how do I connect to the universe, how can I find my purpose? And from there, somehow I rolled into realizing I needed jobs, and I went, so I went to work at a few places, started to watch the way, observe the way people were interacting, seeing that human beings in general were really well-meaning. Most people I met were well-meaning, but when you put them together, it was a mess. So I was really interested in, like, how do we work out that mess? How can people that are so well-meaning, so strong in their values, so wonderful, so inspiring, and so deserving of respect, how do we put them all in a room and find that it really could be very, very conflict-oriented, very difficult to have dialogue, difficult to have communication? So I was asking those questions. And so I went back to school and I studied group dynamics, right? And learned a lot about that. And then later kind of rolled into this area of things, where I kind of happened to be asking, okay, so now and I'm not going to talk about all the group dynamics piece, although it's important, it's not the topic here. Now that I've got kind of some understanding of that, how do we work, what do we do as individuals in that situation? And I was working at the University of Pennsylvania and got to meet some people like Annie McKee and Dan Goleman, and this was in the late 90s, and we started to do some research on emotional intelligence, right? And I would say I was like, if the research is this big, I did this much of it. So I got to be like a little bit of that research, or contribute a little bit to that research. And so for me, the definition of emotional intelligence is really the answer to what we found from the question of what's the difference between outstanding and average leaders. What is the difference between someone that can averagely, I'm going to make up a word, averagely, they averagely could get people to follow them and to, kind of work together as a team? What's the difference between that person and somebody that could be outstanding at it? And usually when we look at outstanding, we think of famous people. We think about people like Oprah Winfrey. We think about Nelson Mandela. That's who I think about anyway. But it's really just anybody in a company or an organization that has that, they're just outstanding at it. So what's the difference? So for me, emotional intelligence is simply the result of the research that made that difference. And there's a lot of depth in that.
Yes.
But if I was going to just say, what is it? It's 4 categories and 12 competencies. And
And we will go over those 4 categories for those who are more interested in what they are, and what the categories are as well, because emotional intelligence, as you're learning, isn't just one direct thing. There's so many layers to it, and there's so many layers to each person individually that no one person's pattern or story is ever going to be the same. However, you can quickly identify certain patterns that help collective individuals figure out how to articulate what they're feeling or how they're operating, and then putting those words to it can help them thrive as leaders more effectively. So thank you very much. Our next panelist is Stacy Miller, who is a dedicated diversity and inclusion professional with Ahold USA and experienced professional across the CPG, retail, and building product industries. Stacy devotes her energy to supporting the associates and business leaders across the Ahold USA operating companies to drive diversity and inclusion initiatives. She draws upon 25 plus years of corporate business experience and 29 years of military service. She's a former professor and graduate studies from Delaware Valley College, and today continues her passion to support students through her work as a college outreach lead and the New Greater Philadelphia chapter, supporting partnerships across local universities. Stacy earned this distinction of one of the top women in grocery in 2015 and accepted the award on behalf of New Greater Philadelphia's College Outreach of the year of 2016. So welcome, Stacy.
Thank you.
That
So glad to
grocery
be here.
industry is not easy to be in.
No, it's not, but it's fun.
So we have 2 people here with military background, which is a fun experience. Yes?
Yes.
Yeah. 2 women.
2 women.
And so how would you say that military experience helped you moving into more of the CPG retail industries as a leader?
Well, I would say, I started when I was 17 years old in the military, served a dual career. I was a traditional guardsman, so I was a weekend warrior, 1 weekend a month, and then my, active duty, temporary duty assignments periodically throughout the year, and then had my Monday through Friday civilian job. Really, it was complementing one another throughout, and that my military career, taught me, the leadership, the command and control, process oriented, but also, respect and integrity, for everyone, and that everyone has a chance. And my last role in the military, I was the state human resource advisor, which was really the diversity and inclusion type of role for that we call that today. And that, really, I think was my favorite job, in which it really helped me support the leadership, but also support all of the airmen in the Pennsylvania Air National Guard, and enabling them to have a robust career and really follow that passion and follow their passion and vision of what they want to do with that career.
Yes. So you pointed on something that I feel very strongly about, and it's a controversial conversation in the topic of emotional intelligence that I know that Dr. Felice Tillin has dealt with on numerous occasions, probably. It's this belief that you're either born with emotional intelligence or can you learn emotional intelligence. I know for sure in all of the people that I've worked with that I believe everyone can learn emotional intelligence. Just like you learn how to do basic things when you're a child, if you're not taught how to be thoughtful or compassionate or self aware, then you just don't know what you don't know. But if somebody taught you that, then you would know it. So I feel that people that lack emotional intelligence just lack certain tools in their toolbox that they can add to their toolbox once they learn them. So I would love to get some insight from all of you in your experiences, starting with Carol, of that perspective and how you've seen people and companies or teams transform once these tools were brought into the equation.
I would say the first thing we all need to do is read. And we can teach ourselves these skills. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to try to be better human beings. And one thing is to be self reflective and figure out what those tips are. And way different than what many of us first experienced, there's now the internet. And man, you can learn so much and certainly, evaluate the source. But you can certainly learn a lot. Some simple tips is, and you've all heard it, pause, wait, reflect, walk away, and think about it. And much of what we teach our kids but don't apply ourselves. Honey, get control of yourself. Go sit down for a moment while you think about this. We often coach our children, but we don't coach ourselves. Another thing I experienced is I can do it externally. Pretty much people can't rattle me. But then it's the internal talk. And I think that's what we have to manage. So we look like we're all cool, calm, and collected, and we can manage our emotions and others. But yet we get into that cycle of negative self-talk. Why did that happen? Why did they do that to me? What am I going to do? And it's this, I think of a cow. I grew up on a gentleman's farm, and the cows ruminate. They just chew their grass over and over again. And I think we tend to do that, which saps energy. So we have to do internal emotional intelligence. And why am I doing this? What is the real facts? What can happen? Stop that cycle of negative self-talk. And I think also help our teams do the same thing to be self-reflective. I was on a call recently where the person on the call lost it, and which was really unusual for me. In the military, you don't usually lose it. I mean, everybody's carrying a weapon, so it's not really wise to lose it. But I was just shocked that in a professional setting, someone would get all upset. And we were actually on a conference call. So I had to put it on mute and say, hey, let's talk about this later. Get control of yourself. So helping our teams learn some of those tips and being empathetic enough to help them through some of those challenges. And just in the military, I think when you have the responsibility of someone's health, welfare, and actual life limb, eyesight is usually what we say, that puts a whole different spin on things. So you tend to step out of this rumination, you tend to step out of this, my emotions are most important, and you really think about the safety of the team and the mission at hand. So I think the military can teach folks a lot about controlling emotions, as long as you just don't turn them inward and, as I said, ruminate on that. So I call it internal emotional intelligence.
Yes, which is it becomes a skill set that becomes almost habitual, just like brushing your teeth would. When you do it enough, as soon as you're in that trigger moment, like the person that lost their cool got triggered. And when you hit that trigger within yourself, you can say, what is really happening? Am I feeling is it really real, or is it my ego? And how can I change my perspective to change my emotional state right now so I can engage at the highest level possible? But once you ask those series of questions to yourself and you condition yourself, you can do it a lot more quickly and effectively as a process within yourself. So it's a great muscle to develop in order to be in more control of your emotional state. So you used some similar questions as mine, but what's really happening? Is this really real? For me, I always say, is my ego tripping right now? And how can I get to a better emotional state by changing my perspective? Same things, same ones?
Definitely, and I think that also then changes that self-talk about worry. we often worry about things that if you actually analyze them are unrealistic and probably we overblow what could happen. So I think that self-talk, both is in terms of responding to a trigger as well as responding to your own internal talk, can make a big difference in how you move forward.
Thank you. So, Tara, what have you seen? Maybe there's a story you can share, or just a collective sense of, this thought process where people think as adults we should all know this stuff already, but when you've applied some of these principles, you've seen great shifts and change.
Sure. That's a really good question. So the one thing that makes me batty, to be honest, is when we're trying to develop a leader, and maybe that person's manager says, "Well, they just need to work on emotional intelligence." Emotional intelligence is I said earlier it was multifaceted. There are so many different aspects of it that to tell someone you need to go work on emotional intelligence is the same thing as telling them you need to find your reason for being. They're like, okay, where do I start? What do I look at? So emotional intelligence incorporates some things that people naturally think of and understand, such as, interpersonal skills, right? Self-awareness, others' awareness, self-expression. Those are the things that usually come to mind first, right? Am I aware of my own emotions? Am I a confident person? Do I have a high self-regard, right? And then they think about, am I aware of others' emotions? Can I, things like read a room, can I kind of perceive other people's body language? Do I have a good understanding of what others want and what they're motivated by? But there are other aspects to it as well that I think can really be barriers for people's leadership development. Things like decision making. And there are aspects of decision making that can either make you good at it or bad at it. So some people can't really solve problems when they're emotional, right? If you're emotional, you have a hard time kind of seeing your way through a challenge or an opportunity. So that's a really specific facet, right, of emotional intelligence that it's easier to say, Felice, we need to work on your problem solving skills, right? When you're emotional, you have a hard time kind of assessing a situation, understanding what aspect of it to kind of go after, and then figure out the solution. So that kind of directive, right, or advice, I think is a lot more tangible for people, and a lot more actionable. One of the other things I've seen play out a lot on the leadership stage, lately, both in my really intimate work with people and group work and really on the world stage, is this whole notion of impulse control, which also has to do with decision making. So when people are emotional or when there's emotion involved, are they reacting or responding, right? Are we able to kind of control our impulses and take the pause and step back? So again, we could probably talk about EQ for a whole week and, and dive into all the different elements of it. But I've seen that when people can really kind of zero in on the piece of it that they're struggling with, that's the best way often for them to start to see some change, right, and evolve to being a more effective leader.
Absolutely. And when you said, if someone's emotional and then they can't make decisions as effectively, and they can identify that with themselves, as Tara had said, it's multifaceted, then that leader can actually get into what makes me feel so overwhelmed in decision making, what fears come up. So you keep going layer to layer till it gets to a point where you don't have to do that analyzation every time, but you could say, decisions coming up, I'm feeling fear over making the wrong decision because I fear disappointing people. And that's really the root of the fear. And when you can change that fear, or at least identify the fear, then you can overcome the fear and process the situation a lot more effectively more times in the future. So multifaceted, and we could talk about for a week and still just keep getting surface after surface because there are so many layers, and that's not meant to be overwhelming. It's really meant to say it's an ongoing work in progress always. And just when you think you've mastered it, something will trigger you and you're like, oh man, back to the drawing board because I just got triggered in something that's obviously not healed within me, or I wouldn't have been triggered. So Felice, you probably had this question before, you were working with Daniel Goleman and creating this content to put out to the world in this package of, here's something that we need to look at in a facet of psychology. So the understanding of, can this be taught? Because for so long it was so ignored.
It was interesting when you said that originally because I thought, yeah, now So I'm just going to go to now. The problem is you go into somebody's office and they say that person has no emotional intelligence. Go fix them. Or my team has no emotional intelligence. Fix the whole team, right? Or the company. Or we want an emotionally intelligent culture. So when we started this, just for a little historic view, when we started this years ago, one of the questions was really, can people learn it? So then there was a whole kind of process of kind of doing, I would say, action learning projects to kind of do classes, do kind of work with people to see, and do coaching to see if they could learn it. And we found that they could in most cases. Some things were harder than others, but we found that they could learn it. The other thing that I think was really interesting is that in the United States, when we came into companies and said we could help you with emotional intelligence, we give the whole reason for why it's connected to leadership, they would be like, no, thank you, no. So where did we start doing this work? We started doing it in Africa, where people were really struggling with some deeper issues around how to solve the HIV/AIDS issue. So the UN was really interested in it. And then there were companies in Europe that were like, yeah, that's what we need. So Italy and England was a little bit later, but so a lot of this kind of, in my experience, got the first openness to this was not in this country, but it was in other cultures and other countries where they were more open. And I would say in Africa, interestingly, the whole idea of emotion was a very positive kind of thing. One of the things, though, we've learned over the years, and I would just say this has been striking me in my own work, and I think also in the research, but even in my own coaching work and work with people, is that the first place I like to go with people now, and I bet a lot of people here do the same thing, is what their strength is. We found out that negative kind of like, here are all the things you don't have. You have a 4 in self-management, you have a 3 in emotional self-awareness, you have a 1.5 in empathy, and you have a 5 in collaboration. I start with the 5, right? And it's okay if like that 1.5 only gets to a 1.75, but I don't want to lose the 5 in collaboration. I'm using numbers here, but that's so I find that for people in this room too today, it's like, look at the thing, the thing that you come with, that special part that's you, that you bring to every situation. Think about the feedback people give you when they really give you some good positive feedback. Rare gift, but when they give you real, not the, oh, you're fabulous, but you are really good with talking to people when they have a problem. You're the person everybody wants to go to. Or you're the person you're always friendly to everybody. Like, go to the thing that you're the best at. Try to find that. And the rest of that emotional, and I love the way we're talking about the layers, the rest of that onion you could work on that, but if you could get to what the core of your people, I don't really like this, but I'm going to say it. If you can get the core of your special sauce, don't lose yourself in the kind of rumination of, oh my gosh, I lost my self-control. I will tell you that people that have been working on this, I've been in the room with these people that work on self-management, right? We've been studying emotional intelligence. We work on self-management. Nobody's that great at it, right? You get better at it over time. Everybody has triggers. Everybody gets triggered sometimes. And it's a matter of, allow that to happen and that kind of make it less, not more. That's the point.
I think
Yeah, sure.
You're absolutely right. Oh, you're absolutely right, and we all get triggered. Because I worked in corporate for so long, I love kind of connecting the dots, right, between the theory and the research and how it shows up in the workplace. And when people say things like "so and so has no composure," what they're really saying is that person has very low impulse control, right? So those are some of the ways that kind of the EQ or the emotional intelligence show up in the workplace. You have all of these these handles that folks use to describe the really strong leaders who everybody wants to follow and the ones who struggle to get above a certain level. And that really is the differentiator, right? So that's one example of how the facet connects to a competence.
And to your point, too, no matter how much you work on this, there's going to be triggers. I always say that the triggers get less frequent, or when you are triggered, you get past it faster. So you're like, okay, so all my students will come to me now and they'll say, this was so not EI, but I did it anyway. And they're calling themselves out. And I'm like, okay, well, it's at least you're self-aware that you know it wasn't. And how would you do it differently the next time? And so that self-awareness is allowing them to get to a point where they're doing it less frequently, or they're getting through it faster, and what I call course correction. So your course correction happens faster. So you can, if you do something that hurts somebody else and you knew that you didn't handle it in the best way possible, you can go to them more quickly and say, I'm sorry, that was totally wrong, and this is how I should have done it better. And that's an emotionally intelligent conversation. It's not this strive for perfection, but this desire to continuously be the best version of yourself, knowing you're going to make mistakes, knowing you're going to get triggered, but you course correct faster. So Stacy, oh, by the way, I wanted to say something. What Dr. Felice was saying about when she was first trying to bring it to everyone in the U.S., and it was called soft skill sets, and they'd say, we don't need those soft skill sets. And that was always a trigger for me. And I'm like, you mean compassion and empathy, understanding those things? So now it's referred to as impact skill sets, which I think is a more appropriate term because they are impactful skill sets.
One thing people say now is soft skills are hard.
That's why they ignore them for real. So Stacy, you had this transition as we talked about. What is a story that you've seen in your leadership that you could share with us that proved that you saw somebody's progress, or even your own progress? The more you learned, the more you could see results, where it's supporting that you can be taught this, and it does take practice.
Well, I think, for all of us, it is quite a journey, but it is really awesome when you're able to see when someone has taken kind of that leadership or those steps to build themselves. And for me personally, it has been a long journey, but it's more of learning. But to me, the key is being my authentic self. I receive feedback sometimes that, while I'm very outgoing and I'm very directive in my approach of things, thanks to the military, I am that way. But it's how you then channel it, and how do you, learn to, and I'll use the word assimilate to the organization, or assimilate to the environment, and the culture. And you need to be able to learn and to adapt, but still be your authentic self. Don't give that up. And that makes you who you are. And that will help others to see that you can be different, and you can have bring value to the organization, bring value to whatever it is that you do, and be successful at it at the same time. So that's
a delicate balance that you just referred to in being your authentic self, but also assimilating to a situation. And really that placates to the ego for some people that struggle with that if you're in a situation where you want change, you still want what you want. So if you're uber directive and you know that the person that you're speaking to will shut down under that, you can't be that directive to get what you want. So you assimilate to meet someone where they might be at a little bit more to receive. So for example, talking about that, you're a 5 at collaboration. Instead of saying to someone, you really lack empathy, it's, you know what, you're really amazing. at collaboration, I bet you'd be even more of a rock star at collaboration when you build up your empathy a little bit more, because then you can actually feel how other people are feeling, and you can take that collaboration strength to a whole different level. Do you see how different that is than, hey, you have 5 in collaboration, but let's work at that 1.2 on empathy is not so good, right? Then somebody shuts down. So it's a very delicate balance within your own self-awareness to shift from, if I speak this way to somebody, they might shut down. So I'm not getting what I want. So maybe I could speak to them and meet them where they're at in a softer way, still being my authentic self. But now I can get what I need and want out of the situation. Does that make sense to everybody? It's a talent. It really is. And you learn, because sometimes your ego just wants to, I'm very directive too. And sometimes I just want to be direct and say what I want to say, but I'm not going to get what I want doing that. So I need to speak to someone where they can hear me versus my ego being fulfilled in the process. So speaking of ego, ego has been taught that it's something that helps you become successful. And now as we're uncovering all this, that my friend's writing a book right now called Your Ego is Not Your Amigo. And that's a true assessment and statement, because the ego just has this desire to be right. And we can compete within ourselves to be the best version of ourselves, to keep escalating in our success into that old mindset that the ego drives you to be more successful. But your own desire to be successful can make you successful. But it's our fears, which I also connect with the ego, it's our fears that hold us back. So how important do you feel, I'm going to start with Tara on this, how important do you feel when working with a group to help address people's fears, to help them identify their own self-awareness, to escalate faster, to elevate faster, I should say?
Ooh, fears. It's probably the most human thing of all. We all experience that. So one of the ways, the tagline for my leadership development business I had was an inspired purpose and a practical approach, because it's really all about how do you help make this idea or kind of this challenge real for people. So where I deal with fears is mostly in taking new steps, right, toward greater opportunities. So if somebody has a dream or a vision for their life or for their career, how do they kind of move from where they are to where they want to be? And that's obviously a very intense, right, self kind of reflection process. So one of the things we have them do is write down, and I'll talk about it a little bit in the keynote, so I don't want to give too much of it away, but really just get a little bit of a list of, what's the best thing that could happen if I take this particular step or have this conversation or, say this thing, and what's the worst thing that could happen if I do it, and making it a little bit more real for ourselves. Sometimes we need to get out of our heads. When we keep something in our head and don't get it down on paper, right, and kind of make it concrete, we make it a lot more scary than it actually is. So I try to use that technique a lot. What are all the different ways we can get an idea or a thought or a fear out of our heads into the real world, where we can touch it and kind of play with it a little bit. And I find making it concrete, it makes it conquerable, if you will. Does that make sense?
It seems to minimize that fear that we escalated in our mind. A lot of people have this with just having a simple conversation with somebody. And it's because we've been programmed with this belief that conflict is a bad thing. Conflict, by the way, is an amazing thing to build intimacy in every relationship when you approach it effectively. Because when you can make it through an uncomfortable conversation with somebody, and they learn that you're there to understand them instead of fight with them or be right in that situation, you actually build a greater level of trust than you can if everything's just great all along. So moving from fear to conflict, Carol, how would you suggest that you've seen in some of your experiences that conflict is actually can be a highly emotionally intelligent strategy to build a team's effectiveness or trust? And in the military, you needed a lot of that.
Things on that. I think there's two kinds of conflict. There's emotional conflict where you're at odds with one another, It's very negative. And then there's idea conflict, arguing for one particular course of action versus another. That's a really good thing. But in order to get to that place, you have to somehow push that emotional conflict out of the way so that you can present ideas without people jumping on you and feel confident and safe as you discuss solutions to a problem that you'll be considered. But it's incredible the lack of skill there is in that area. So you're on a team and someone says, hey, I think maybe we ought to do this. What's a common response to that? That's stupid. That's not going to work. I mean, so often it's just like this gut reaction. We already did that. We tried that before you were here. Instead of, hey, help me understand that. One trick I learned, and I believe some of this stuff with emotional intelligence, go back after work and think about all those things about what's my fear, what are my triggers, but there are specific tips you can do to make it work. And then you can reflect on why did it happen? What were my triggers? But you can put skills in place whether you believe in them or not. And one of them, as I said, is to pause and think about. The other thing is think about, I call it servant leadership. Servant leadership is when your mindset is in the other person's well-being. What is it they need? How can my position help them? So I'm a general officer. A lot of people think general officer means you get all kinds of privileges. Well, I firmly believe, and you will find that just about every senior officer feels the same way, you use your position to help others, not yourself. That's why you're there. So getting rid of fear is to relate to the other person, to stop and think and figure out what they need and how you can help them. I tried this trick with my kids, and quite frankly, I learned it from Oprah, and they called me out. They knew that's where I learned it. But you know how you pick them up at school and they'll come and they'll say, I hate my teacher, or I hate Johnny. What do we as parents often say?
Don't say that.
Don't say that. You know you like your teacher. Well, we just shut them down. They're not going to tell us stuff. We didn't respect them. So I learned the trick, and it really works, and I now use it at work. I just say, hey, tell me about that. Now, they caught on that sometimes I never listened to their answer, but at least I said, tell me about that. So that I got that to be my first response. Now I say, hey, help me understand where you're coming from. When somebody says something like, oh, that's not going to work, hey, help me understand that. And that's reaching out to them, and that's changing that whole dynamic about your ego. You get out of yourself and you're caring about the other person. So I think empathy is also a tactic to help you be more emotionally intelligent. I also think you need to be really careful of those people that can use emotional intelligence against you and manipulate you. They understand your weaknesses and they can manipulate you for ill. What can do good can also do harm. So building up your own emotional intelligence skills will keep you immune from those who are trying to use it against you. So I would caution against that.
That's great advice. So, in that, people are probably thinking, wait, how do I know if somebody's emotionally, I said earlier, you could be a Yoda of your own life and a Jedi to others. So, you want a good Jedi leader, right? So, what would you say, or how important would you say, Dr. Felice, intuition has been in teaching emotional intelligence and then also observing maybe non-positive emotional intelligence?
Okay, so let's define intuition. Just tell me what you
The
think.
inner knowing, the gut feeling,
Okay, your gut feeling. So how important is that in emotional intelligence?
and being emotionally intelligent.
Okay. Well, I don't really know, because I mean I'm going to say that I think that the more self-aware you are, the more connected you could be to your intuition. The way I see intuition, so I want to know what you were saying there. The way I see intuition, because gut feelings could be deceiving, because my gut feeling could be I don't like you and you're out to get me, so therefore, right? My gut feeling could not necessarily, my gut is connected to my amygdala, right, in my brain. It could connect to all kinds of things. So my gut could be actually literally off. And now there's all that research on microbes, right? I could have eaten the wrong thing and my gut could be off, right? All that
Better
chocolate.
probiotics.
All that chocolate, it's like, oh, maybe it's the chocolate or the coffee. I used to have meetings with somebody and we both were like, okay, we're going to only drink 1 cup of coffee because by the 3rd cup we'd be arguing. So I think but I do so all that said, I think it's important to recognize what's going on for you in a situation or what's going on for someone else in a situation using your intuition. And here's what I ask students to do. I ask them when they say to me, well, it's just what my intuition told me. Here's what I ask other people to do, and I ask myself too. What is the data I have inside myself that's making me see or feel this way? And if the data is every time, so I'll give you an example. Every time I open my mouth to say something in a meeting, another particular person ends up interrupting me. Okay? So the first time it happens, it's like, I don't like it. The second time or it's like, it's one time. The second time I don't like it. The third time I'm kind of questioning, is that really happening? My intuition is telling me I'm being interrupted, but is it really happening? And then I start counting. And that might be me, just I'm counting. Maybe you don't count. But I realize it's like, oh, that person did that to me I'm counting backwards. That person did that 3 times. Now there's a lot I could go with that. It's like, what do they need, right? So there's a piece of what do they need, but then there's also the piece, what do I need? I need to say something. So what do I say? This happened to me yesterday. I just went like this. I said, just give me a minute. I didn't finish yet, and used the hand, the hand. And I was able to finish what I said, and it actually changed the dynamic in the room. But I wasn't completely sure I was being interrupted just because my gut was telling me that. I had to really kind of go back and reflect on it a little bit. So I do think it's important to use intuition, and I do think that even sometimes you can't collect the data and you need to just make a decision and move. I do think that that's the case, but I also feel like I would be cautious around it. I don't know if that answered
love
the
that
question.
term, collect the data. That's so visual. What she's really saying is she's going through all of her life experiences that have created her perspective in that very moment. And she's saying, is my perspective really real? Or is this from my data that's not serving me right now? So I need to go back and reflect upon it. And wow, that's so fun and powerful. That's good to share with kids so they can actually go into their data like a computer. I love that. I always try to relate it back to kids. Kids actually, because I'm with my children, kids actually get it faster. But when you can articulate it in a gamified way, like go back into your data, they seem to get it and then go forward so much faster because they're born into this world. The way I see it, and I could be totally wrong, but I've observed so many people that were actually born emotionally intelligent, filled with love and joy, and it's through the pains and fears that are projected on us and the life experiences that make us more guarded or more fearful or more judgmental. We didn't come in this world judgmental, or more or less apt to let somebody in or communicate with them. And so children actually, I believe, get it faster because they're still there in more of a pure state. They sometimes just need the words or the visual to wrap around what it is that they want to articulate or the action they want to execute. So speaking of perspective, Stacy, how have you been, and she's totally on the hot seat for this, she's not prepared for this question, but we're talking about perspective and it's such a fun, powerful topic. How have you been able to use perspective and the power of perspective to take a situation that maybe was going awry and turn people around, or maybe a tactic that you might use to do that in a situation in leadership where somebody or someone on your team thinks everyone's against them, for example, and you need to shift their perspective, teaching the power of perspective for somebody.
Well,
I told you she was on the hot seat.
yeah,
She
I'm
wasn't
on the
prepared for
hot.
that
I'm
one.
on the hot seat a little bit. I think, for me, it's, I have a personal example and then a work example. I'll start with my personal example so I can continue to think through the other one. So, but for us, and you were talking about immersion, how you handle conflict and how have to do that data collection. And, I have an 18-year-old and a 21-year-old, and the 21-year-old, sometimes, she's very much of a planner and very much of but she's very outgoing and giving and caring. And, but she's in control. Wonder where she learned that from. And so, but she was in a situation where someone hurt her feelings and hurt her, and she wanted to go and do something not very nice to them. And I said, so instead of them going to jail, you're going to be going to jail, and because the cops are going to come after you because of A, B, and C that you would be doing. And thank God she called me before she did. And she, oh, so it's like getting people to think through it and think through, what those actions and outcomes are. On the business side, and the business example is, I would say really the journey that we've been on, Ahold USA. And for those that don't know what Ahold is, it's the support organization for Giant Foods, if you're a local here, so our Giant and Martin stores. And it's really that D&I journey. And how are we getting, before it was always considered that D&I or that HR thing that they did, but transitioning it into more of it's a business initiative, and how can we leverage the talents, the abilities, the intellect, the knowledge and experiences that all of our associates have, and to support them in their growth and their development. And so, buy-in of leadership was the first thing. And while they said, but have they done? And by going through a journey and kind of reshaping our business resource groups and getting, the leadership to be from the business to be the executive sponsors of our business resource groups has really changed all that we have been doing. And it's, so it's getting past that, or that getting into the buy-in from leadership at the top and getting them to understand the impact of, and then demonstrating it and showing it with numbers, with examples, with stories. We still have a long journey to go, but over the past year and a half, we've done amazing things.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Please.
Just a comment on perspective. I think there's no way to turn a team around and look at another perspective unless you are skilled at understanding different perspectives. And the only way that's going to happen is if you read, travel, listen, observe, stay out of your little egocentric world. There's a great new book out there, The Hillbilly. The legacy,
the Hillbilly Elegy.
Yeah, the Hillbilly
Fantastic.
Elegy about a person who moved from Appalachia to Harvard and what that person experienced. So when the worlds are completely different than what we know, that's not an excuse to maintain a static perspective. You can teach yourself other perspectives. The military does that. Cultural competency is understanding different perspectives. And I don't think we can be successful as leaders or as human beings unless we can understand perspectives.
I love the power of perspective. It's you can actually play games with your teams or your children to say, here's a situation. Now let's figure out 3 other perspectives. Take your first perspective, but let's figure out 3 other perspectives. You can do the exercise by taking clips of a movie and say, now what's your perspective of that? And then everyone in the team can share their perspective. And everyone's perspective can be very different based on their life experience. And so you can also create an exercise with your team when they say, this person's doing this, but that's your perspective. What could their perspective be? What other situations could really be happening, and really exercise that muscle through. So, Carol, staying with you with your work that you're doing with NBC Universal, do you have to do a perspective shift from veterans who have served to shift into more of a corporate environment, taking from two different, or are they already capable of shifting perspective quickly on their own?
So I'll address what I call the civilian-military divide. When less than 1% serve in an all-volunteer force. Back during the Vietnam War, probably about 60%, 75% would say, I know someone who serves or has served. Today, it's down to about 30-some% when you ask folks between 20-something and 35. And so we're creating a warrior caste, because military folks tend to stay in legacy lines. If your father served, or your mother served, you tend to serve. But we're not seeing a lot of new families step up and serve. It's also primarily in central United States and in the South. You don't see it on the East Coast, and people joining. Certainly you see the installations, but people joining from the East and West Coast. So the perspective I work really hard on to change is the narrative about our military. And the narrative that you'll see in film, the broken heroes, the PTSD, and so we're not seeing those positive stories. So we're working really hard to shift perspective about our military community, because you're not going to hire them if you don't understand them. So it's what I call military acumen. Let's increase our understanding. And I'll leave you with a little action item, and one of them is, as far as emotional intelligence goes, I like to say always use open-ended questions, and that helps you understand other people. But when it comes to the military, you know how we all say thank you for your service when you see somebody in the airport? That's a wonderful thing to do, but does that increase our knowledge of that individual or of service? So I ask people, if you've got the time, instead of saying thank you for your service, hey, tell me what you do. What did you do in the service, or what are you doing now? And boy, I'll tell you what, when you say thanks for your service, none of us know what to say. You know, thanks for the support, or let's remember those ones that are over there now, something like that. But when you say, hey, tell me about your service, they'll light up. Well, I was a gunner, and especially the Vietnam vets, when we treated them so poorly when they came home. So that's all about perspective, and to shift our own perspective as a nation when it comes to understanding our military, and to broaden the civilian, and to lessen the civilian-military divide and broaden our understanding.
Thank you. So Tara, Carol just really emphasized with something that she's very passionate about doing in her work, and an advocacy of how emotional intelligence can shift perspective and make a real impact. Having just started a company, I'm sure you have a very clear intention of what your servant leadership is going to look like, using emotional intelligence to impact the world at a greater level.
Yeah, thank you. So I mentioned earlier that we started the new firm to help companies create more fertile soil, right, that leaders can thrive in. The major paradigm shift there, to your point, is really from kind of a one-way engagement paradigm to more of a relationship-based engagement paradigm, right, which is really all about emotional intelligence. So one of the things I share with people is we talk a lot about, you know, we meaning corporate America, talks a lot about the millennial workforce, and what millennials want and expect, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I have found it interesting from my vantage point that many corporations want to leverage millennials for product development innovation, marketing innovation, digital innovation, right? You can go down the list. Yet, they've not really invited millennials into HR innovation, right? It's like, give me the new product, give me the new marketing idea, but don't touch my policies and practices. And so that when I say we need to kind of create a relationship, right, a reciprocal paradigm for the emerging workforce that will become the predominant workforce, and companies, that's really kind of the basis of, I think, where EI comes into play, because we're kind of past the whole push proposition thing. Companies can no longer say, this is how we operate, you know, these are my rules, This is how long it's going to take you to get promoted. This is how we roll. Want you to come in and be happy with that and get with it. And hopefully you'll hang out. That's just not how people are. Folks have too many other options. And some of those options are really within their own, self entity, right? Their own creativity, their own imagination, plus their computer. So going from kind of that push proposition to more of a reciprocity based mindset and paradigm is really at the heart of why I wanted to do this work, because I don't think companies are there yet and they need to get there.
Yeah. I mean, it's as simple as thing as, we keep evolving as a culture. And when I was a kid and I went for my early jobs, my dad, he had me later in life and he's 84 now, but he would say, just be quiet and be happy you have a job. And now, if my kids came home and said, Mom, my boss was abusive, I wouldn't say just be quiet and be happy that you have a job. I'd give them very different approaches. So the employees' expectation of how they should be treated, how they want to live their lives has all changed. So those policies, if they're not matching, can no way sustain growth or someone staying there for that matter. So thank you for sharing that, because that is a huge shift that really is where I feel, and I opened up with, I feel that there is a massive opportunity for cultural innovation and women to participate in this next phase of innovation. I'm going to ask that same question for the last two panelists, and then we're going to open it up if anyone has questions. So if you do, begin to prepare your question. So Dr. Felice, what would you say is your next? You've done so much in the pioneering of this becoming a relevant conversation. What's next for your impact in this space?
So, it's, I think one of the places I get personally the most satisfaction is when I can kind of spread this information around. So I don't really want to hold it to myself. I have a need to really share it with others. I'm still a learner. I mean, by the way, I really loved what you said, Carol, about asking a more open-ended question to the military. I wanted to do that with you outside, and I kind of struggled with it a little bit. So I'm learning all the time. So part of this journey for me is to keep myself not in a place of I've done this, I know this, but more in a place of what else is there. What was the research done in 2017 and 16 and 15? Doing that kind of work. What's coming up now and I think when you said that thing about innovation and human resources, I mean, this is a place where I am really interested in moving things to the next level. So when I go into organizations, get a chance to work with millennials or whoever is there, to be able to encourage them and to encourage the voice that they have to try and experiment and to do new things and to figuring out ways of getting that voice heard. So facilitating, I guess.
As far as we've come, there's so much more work to be done, which is amazing. And the information will keep evolving too, as we, even just newer issues. Like my daughters are 13, we're dealing with cyberbullying right now. That didn't exist in our generation. And so there's different things that are going to be able to or need to come up in order to keep handling emotional intelligence as we evolve as human beings. So Stacy, what is your future vision of what your servant leadership looks like for making impact in this space?
Well, for me in the D&I space, it isn't just recognizing the differences that we all have, but it's really, getting those differences to work together in an inclusive environment. And, some of the things around, veterans and millennials, for us as an organization, we're working on, creating a veterans employment strategy so that we're raising awareness not only how we're recruiting, but also as we're interviewing and, onboarding them to be understanding and inclusive and providing them that space to be able, or that buddy, the battle buddy, for when they join, that they can reach out to a peer, a veteran peer, to be able to help navigate them through the journey of onboarding and learning the ways of working of the organization. We know that the millennials are our future. and creating. I just actually held a focus group of millennials of how can we be more attractive and how can we retain millennials in our workforce. And so taking those elements and building it, continuing to build it further, especially leveraging our business resource groups so that we can help to support the organization. And we have 3 promises, one of which to be a better place to work, a better place to shop, and to be a better neighbor. The better neighbor, which is the community service, always is the easy part for it. But it's how can we be that better place to work and to be that better place to shop for our customers. It isn't about retaining, attracting and retaining associates. It's also about attracting and retaining our customer base. And so how can we as an organization be more inclusive within our stores or within the services that we provide? And that's really where my journey is.
Sure, absolutely.
For everybody out there, you mentioned trying to understand the military and veterans hiring. We sponsor the Comcast NBC Universal Employer School. And this is an online, no-cost library for everybody. So go there, psycharmor.org, and a whole library of courses. A simple one is 15 things every veteran wants you to know. Military culture, real short, targeted videos. So great, out there for everybody. We sponsored it. So anybody out there that wants to learn a little bit more about the military, it's a great resource. So please check it out.
Great, thank you, absolutely. And just as a comment about millennials too, if any of you are in here trying to figure out how to connect to that space more, social impact has had a huge shift in our society, and the word altruism was used earlier, but they are looking to be a part of things that are making impact. And it's interesting because a lot of it's misconstrued as entitlement, where actually they want something more purposeful. And I'm going to give you one of the simplest examples that just blew my mind. The other day, I brought home T-shirts from my friend who has a company called Do Good Stuff. So the T-shirt says Do Good Stuff on it. And it's really about sending this mission about being more self-aware and doing good things. And my daughters go, but what does it do? And I go, what do you mean, what does it do? And they go, like, what does it do? Like, Ivoriella gives back to the elephants. Who are they giving back to? And I said, I think this water foundation. And they said, well, you need to find out first. And then if it's about a water foundation, they should have a water symbol on the back of it so we know why we're buying it. And I was like, wow. They really care about, like, what does it do? Like, is there a meaning? So it's a whole, the perspective keeps shifting and evolving. So with that said, I want to open up to just a few questions before we break for lunch. There's microphones on each side. It's always interesting to see who's going to be the first.
Thank you so much for being here. So my question is for the panelists who have children. Everyone, talks about finding that balance between, being a working person, working mother, and being a mother. And I have 2 children, 4 and 7, and it's been very hard for me to not feel guilt. And I struggle with this every day. I have so many things I have to do, and then my son is pulling me like, come play games with us. And I'm always like, in a minute. And that minute just never comes. So what's your experience? How did you, and how can emotional intelligence can bring us more balance?
Who wants to take that? Everyone here's a
I'll start, and I'm sure you guys can add in. For me, I had a dual career and 2 children, so it was quite a challenge. I learned a very valuable lesson when my husband was deployed. Let go. There's others that can do those tasks, some of those tasks for you. Prioritize what you need to do. We as women try to be super moms and super women, and that find the things that you can outsource. And whether it's, buying whether it's those meal kits or, finding somebody to mow your grass. Let go of some of those things so that will give you more time, more quality time with them. Then if you need to put them to bed and turn the computer back on, then that's what you need to do. But my vote is outsource.
Maria, I would say don't discount your example that you're giving your children of being a fulfilled woman and seeking satisfaction and purpose in your life. I asked that of my children. They're now millennials. The youngest is 26. Hey guys, did it bother you that I wasn't around all the time? Mom, you're so badass. That's way better than you being around. So it was more fun just to brag about you than to have you here. So keep in mind that you're giving them a gift when you're doing those other things.
Agreed. I think the illusion of balance is exactly that. It's an illusion, and no one's doing it perfectly, and you can't compare yourself to other people, and being present's important. I think this helicopter parenting, like if I'm not helicoptering my child on being a bad parent, is actually doing a disservice at this stage in our society, where it actually is great that I had to work and be off in the morning because my kids had to learn to make their own lunch for themselves very early on, and that taught them responsibility and how to dress themselves. So, and I would get judged like, your kids are making their lunch, and the truth is that's what was healthier for them. And again, I mean, their normal becomes the normal of you working and multitasking, and just being present and giving love is more important than a lot of the other things that Stacy, right. Let's do quality. Right, exactly. Quality, engagement. Thank you. It is a great question. Anyone else? We have time for one more. Yep, sure.
So it seems like everything you guys have talked about today is actually applicable to any gender, race, religious, sexual orientation. But if we tie it back to women, since this is predominantly women in the room, one, my gut would think, and I'm curious if there's research to support this, that women are probably more naturally adept to having emotional intelligence based upon our compassion, multitasking, things like that. One, is that at all accurate, or is there anything to support that? And two, what would you say are our greatest strengths as women with emotional intelligence and our greatest weaknesses?
Do you want to go with that one first?
Sure. So, yeah, we've been trying to find this out, so there's some conflicting research around it, but I would say that the most recent piece of research looked at emotional intelligence from the ability model. So that's basically a model where people get asked questions about how emotionally intelligent they think they are. And women tend to think they're a little bit more emotionally intelligent than men, but we don't know if we really are. And I think that there's a lot of variables in it. One of the reasons why it's so hard is that there are a lot of variables in it. Emotional intelligence shows up in different places. So just because you're emotionally intelligent in one place doesn't mean you would be in another. So it's quite variable. I think there are some things that women are more vulnerable to than men in terms, and which actually, or I think the other way of looking at it is people that are in less, women, people of African Americans, people that are in the, people of different gender identifications that are not in the majority or not in the leading classes, tend to actually be more sensitive to what's around them. Yeah. So you do kind of get, one of the things that women sometimes can get that sometimes, and I'm not saying this is true for everyone because I know some white men that are very connected to this, but we tend to see things, we can see things from the outside, we can observe in a way that may not be as easy for other people to do. So that kind of can help in your awareness of emotions. But research-based, very little evidence that there's a difference.
How many mothers and fathers are in the room? So thank you. One way we can impact this is how we raise our sons and daughters. Mm-hmm. There's a great book out there called Raising Real Boys, because we tend to raise out emotional intelligence from our boys. When we say, don't cry, that's baby, don't dance, don't dress up in your sister's clothes, all those things that are out there. The girl pink aisle and the boy blue aisle at Walmart. So we as parents can certainly impact our boys being much more emotionally intelligent and our girls also. I do not allow my daughters to diss men because men are their fathers and their brothers and their uncles. And so getting everybody to relate to one another. So I think you can make a big impact as parents on where this goes.
Absolutely. Well, take one more.
I think I have the deepest voice here today. So let me, in my view, I'll stem that belief that, or confirm the belief that women, in fact, do have more emotional intelligence than women. I'll just confirm that. I run an organization called Rotary International here in the Philadelphia area. We've got about 1,500 people that are giving back service to the community. And quite frankly, I surround myself with women because, frankly, they get stuff done. We meaning our allies, as Maura calls it. We'll talk about stuff all day long, but the real power I think the women have, and particularly around this particular conversation of emotional intelligence, is that beautiful natural skill that you have to be able to think things through, see different perspectives, not be so focused on things, but really see the big picture, and you get things done. And that's why I think this kind of a conversation is really powerful for everybody in this room, whether you're men or women. So thank you very much for being here, really.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And the key is keeping the drama and the drama-free zone intact, right? So that we can stay focused on nurturing our strengths and talents and not feed into noise and nonsense that's not valuable and helping make an impact or nurturing what our needs are. So with that said, I would love for everyone to give a big round of applause to the panel, who is all amazing. And everyone, I believe, is going to be around during lunch if there's additional questions. And I would love to thank you all for investing in yourselves up until this point today and through the afternoon, and really hope it's making an incredible impact for you. And we are all going to head to lunch now, and then